Welcome, or I should say welcome back, because you came here, to this event 4 years ago, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, that is crazy. Time flies.
And by the way, your talk was one of the best talks we ever had at this event, Hardwired NYC. For anyone who's interested, if you go, we have a YouTube channel. I don't know if you guys know, but if you go on YouTube and search for Hardwired NYC, you'll see the history of videos, and Daniela's talk is one of the best, one of the most highly viewed, and still super relevant. It was about supply chain.
Right. It was about how do you make a product in New York City? Because when I started the company now almost 7 years ago, which is crazy, there were not that many hardware companies in New York other than 3D printing businesses, and all of their production and manufacturing was done locally. And we make various communications devices, and you just don't make those in the United States. So
yeah, and I remember and that was super candid, and that's one of the many reasons why it was such a great talk. And you seem to remember you talked about how you went on like Alibaba just to try and find the supplier and the whole thing.
Yeah, that's where we started, but we ended up working with a global supply chain firm that helped us assess what would be the risks and opportunities, cost benefits of producing pretty much everywhere in the world. And we looked at China, Vietnam, Canada, the United States. Eventually, long story short, we chose a manufacturer in Mexico, and we still manufacture with them today. And for a variety of reasons that we could not have guessed then, I'm very glad that we do business in Mexico, especially with all of the trade war that's happening now.
Oh, interesting. All right. So for context, tell us about goTenna, what the company does and all those good things.
Yeah. So goTenna is, we create a programmable mobile infrastructure. So if you believe in a future where all of the things that you just saw in this presentation need connectivity, not just to each other, but to the people who use them and other machines that interact with them, then you necessarily also believe that we need to create a decentralized, resilient, and anti-fragile networking infrastructure that connects all of these things without depending on these fragile, centrally controlled systems like cell, satellites, and Wi-Fi. And so we create the world's most scalable mobile mesh networks, very, very long range, low cost, low power, and we create a variety of products. Consumer, you can buy our consumer product at REI or Amazon, but our big business now is enterprise and public safety.
So maybe to double click on the various products, because I think that's interesting from a kind of context perspective. So you historically started with a consumer product. I seem to remember that part of the vision was always to go in the enterprise, but so the initial product was what? It was to for people to be able to communicate with one another when the cell networks were jammed?
Yeah, jammed, unavailable, geographically, non-existent.
So you go camping.
Yeah, so, our consumer product that you can buy pairs to any phone or tablet and enables you to, unlocks those devices' ability to connect peer-to-peer on a, completely mobile off-grid basis. It can interconnect to regular communications networks when available, but it will always work even when everything else fails. So, the primary use cases on the consumer side are, yes, hiking, concerts, travel, preparedness for the zombie apocalypse or, natural disasters. Apparently, we're very big at Burning Man as well. So those are, the applications for the consumer product, but it's not an everyday use case unless you're trying to live completely off the grid. And we do have some people who live in rural areas or who do, work. Like we have some, ranchers who use them every day as the means of communication in their home farms and whatnot. But our consumer product, for the most part, is for those extraordinary or not everyday situations when you otherwise would be unable to communicate. So think of it as basically a 21st century version of a walkie-talkie, except it works with the phones you already have, and it's completely digital communication with meshing on top of it.
And to make it super practical, so it's a little device that you like, which is about like what this.
No, well, that was the first generation device. Our consumer device now is about that size.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's
and you
smaller
just like
than
attach it to your backpack,
or put it in your pocket or in your bag.
and then it's a network, right? So like this group goes camping, we all go in different directions.
Correct.
We have our device, then we pull up our Android or iPhone, and we're able to communicate.
Yeah, I mean, basically, you just get to use your phone the way you do already, except it works when it otherwise wouldn't. That's basically what the consumer product does.
Okay. So not surprisingly, there's a bunch of example use cases on the B2B side. Can you elaborate on those?
So our professional product is a much more interesting business because the pain point is very high. These are, for the most part, people who are putting their lives online for others in situations where service is either always unavailable or compromised due to security. And so they need something every day. Usually not just their lives are on the line for us, but as a result, our lives are online too. You want emergency responders, firefighters, et cetera, to never lose what is known as situational awareness, the ability to know where your team is at all times and to make the right decisions in real time. The best way to describe what our professional product does is, if any of you play multiplayer video games, there's this magic feature that if you play like World of Warcraft or whatnot, you take for granted, which is that you know where all people are at all times. You're talking to every single person who you're doing some kind of mission with. In the real world, that is not possible. So that's really scary because you have people fighting fires, rescuing people from floods, et cetera. And if they can't communicate with each other, then that's when emergencies become disasters. And you've seen that in situations like 9/11, where first responders lost connectivity. You saw it during Hurricane Sandy, which was actually the inspirational moment for me when I started the company 7 years ago, around Halloween, for those of you who are living here. And so what we do is we make that video game reality actually real in the situations where it matters most.
And I read somewhere that your customers include the French army, so thank you for
Correct,
that.
yes. We sell we've sold to over 49 countries, and our customers on the professional side include everyone from the Navy SEALs to the French Army to FEMA.
Are you saying this is a spectrum from the Navy SEALs to the French Army?
Probably the Navy SEALs would say that, but I don't know.
And so first responders, army, so just government customers.
FEMA, so lots of agencies within DHS like FEMA. The government of Puerto Rico, for instance, the island lost 98% of its cell sites after Hurricane Maria, and it took 9 months to get most back online. I think that, we basically solve a problem that in the enterprise, whether it's public sector or business continuity space, it's the difference between lives and livelihoods, being safe and not.
Yeah. And how is it selling to government customers as a young startup?
It's much better than selling to consumers because it's, $1 million, multi-million-dollar contracts at once. They also pay on time. And it's pretty recession-proof, even, with all the craziness that's happening in our political system right now, domestically and abroad. These are, systems and needs that people have regardless of what's going on. If I could go back and do it differently, I probably would have gone straight to enterprise. But yeah, I don't know what I didn't know 7 years ago, but I know now.
Is that interesting, actually, from a product development perspective? Are you finding that there has to be some level of synergy where, with the feedback that you get from consumer, help inform the?
Yeah, absolutely. It's much safer to release a new feature to a bunch of people at Burning Man than it is to, California firefighters.
They don't know the difference, right?
Yes, it's very different. Like the stakes are very different. So we actually did release meshing first to consumers before we released it to our professional customers. However, when we release things on our consumer side sooner, our professional customers get pretty upset because they pay more. So we don't do that much anymore, especially as the business is now pretty much 97% enterprise.
Okay. So maybe to dive into the product and the technology a little bit. So how does it work?
Sure. So we are primarily a networking company. We do make hardware, so it's hardware enabled. But it all happens, as I think a few people here already talked about in the software layer. So we work at the lowest layer all the way up to, you know, the app you see on your phone. But we have a mesh protocol that we call Aspen Grove that very intelligently and dynamically, it's a cognitive system. It will make decisions about how to get from point A to B, even if it has to go through A, B, C, A, B, C, D, E, F. And so, you know, we designed this network topology that deals with the hardest networking situation you can possibly have, which is that you have no service, you have nodes that are always moving, never in the same place, and some of them fall out. And that's actually why we named it Aspen Grove. I don't know how many people know this, but when you see an aspen forest, what you're actually seeing is a single tree with a shared root structure. But what's really interesting about the Aspen Grove is that one tree can, you know, get sick or die, but the entire system will heal back up. But the more there are, the stronger they are, but they're not, it's basically they're interdependent as opposed to codependent, which is pretty interesting. And that's what happens in a mesh system. Someone goes out, it's okay, you can find a different path, but the more there are, you can turn that density into capacity. So we have these networking protocols that live in the firmware that connects the hardware to the software. The apps all look like, well, the consumer app looks just like a regular messaging app, WhatsApp, iMessage, etc. Our professional apps look very different. The UI is bananas. It's not something that you or I could use. It's very complicated, but better than normal UI in this market. And then essentially, really, it just takes the UI and the interface that you understand already, which is the phone, and again, it unlocks its ability to function 100% of the time. So it's pretty simple. You know, when I do demos, when I have done demos in the past, they're not that exciting because it's like, yeah, your phone works, you know, except, you know, it's more interesting when you go out and do it, you know, in a place where you have, your phone is otherwise on, you know, airplane mode or no service.
And that's an SDK on top, right? So you have the consumer product, the enterprise product, and you have a developer product.
Yeah, we have a developer product which includes an embedded board. So we have a variety of different businesses and organizations that have built our hardware into drones, into cars, into anything. And so we have a consumer product, we have our enterprise business continuity and public safety line, and IoT is where we're moving to next. And we see a lot of opportunity, particularly with ag, utilities, and everyone operating essentially at the edge.
So as in having your technology built into ag tech products?
Yeah, or yes. Currently we have certain hospital campuses and utility companies. We actually have the Nike headquarters have a ton of our products for campus security. So they're using the same products that like the Navy SEALs or the French Army are using, but the form factor was very much designed for public safety and defense. So yeah, I think that there's an opportunity for us to just be built straight into other things. And we're starting to see that already.
So that's really interesting, I guess, for all the entrepreneurs and all the people interested in how you know, people build successful startups. You effectively started as an application, and now you are becoming a platform. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. We're basically form factor spectrum agnostic, and so ultimately, we don't believe that we're going to create every single, use case. We're not going to build the product for every single use case, but we've created this very unique data link that can operate over not just many miles. Our range record point to point without meshing is 69 miles, and then you can mesh on top of that many times over. But obviously, it can be used for a lot more than just sending information between firefighters or special operators. It can be used for machine to machine, machine to people to machine, vehicle, et cetera. So we, very much invite anyone to build on top of it. And we have SDKs on the consumer side as well as the professional side, both software and what we call the hardware SDK, which is the embedded board.
Yep. Now, did I read correctly somewhere that there is a crypto and blockchain aspect to this? Is that an experiment? Is that a core part of the product? Yeah,
that's a good question. So when I started the company 7 years ago, I guess 6 years in, 6 years ago, 1 year in, I raised our first seed round, and my deck said, "We are building a decentralized communications network for the world." And at the time, people were like, "What the hell is decentralization?" And right now, it's very much of the zeitgeist, specifically around crypto. And I think that most of what's happening in crypto is bullshit. But I think what is real is when you find applications that are truly decentralized that do need, by definition, a decentralized incentive protocol on top of it. It's not just like retrofitting it to existing business models that aren't working very well, but for a decentralized communications network, there's a very interesting chicken or egg problem, which is if you want to build, for instance, on the consumer product side, imagine a global messaging network free of ISPs and carriers. It was built by the devices in your pocket and those of everyone in this room and everyone in the streets outside, et cetera. What if, regardless of what happens, another Hurricane Sandy, some kind of, a humanitarian issue like people see in Venezuela, et cetera, what if we could always communicate no matter what, independent of these, top-down controlled monopolies? I think that's a pretty interesting idea, but how do you incent the build-out of this decentralized system? How do you also reward the people who build out the system before it's actually useful, et cetera? So we do have an open source Lot 49 protocol that we've named after the Thomas Pynchon book of this underground messaging network, postal network. For anyone who's read The Crying of Lot 49, we're not putting, and we're not doing like a coin offering. There's no business model associated to this other than we believe it should exist. And because we've created the technology, we think, we're in a good position to see how we might build it out, because there's tremendous civic applications and value to a network that is not controlled by any one or handful of entities.
Interesting. And you mentioned you see it around, so you've had quite a bit of a success on the fundraising front, including a very nice round recently. Do you want to talk about this?
Yeah. Yes, we've had success. It's been very hard won. I think fundraising for hardware is still really hard, and in spite of everything that does get funded, there's a smaller subset of VCs who will even talk to you if there's a hardware component. I'll give you an example. When I was fundraising late last year for the Series C that we announced this year, we had 80% of our enterprise customers were paying for some kind of software services on top of the hardware, which is a pretty good story. That's better, in my opinion, than just a software business where all you have is a software revenue. What if you have the software revenue, the recurring revenue, plus the hardware on top? It's a good story. But the second anyone knew that there was hardware involved, there were just some conversations that just couldn't go further. So I think that's sometimes a good thing to have less people to talk to because you waste less of your time. But yes, we closed a round with Founders Fund that's invested in incredible hardware companies, my favorite one being SpaceX, who we're talking to now about connecting, potentially satellites together.
That's pretty cool. Any lesson learned along the way? So one, I guess, clearly is to not waste time with people that cringe at the word hardware. Was there any kind of specific metrics or that you found?
Well, revenue. That's a big one. But no, I think it was smart of us to add a software component as early as possible on the enterprise side. The good news too is that in at least the enterprise public sector world, when they pay for software, they pay for it up front, which is the best kind of recurring revenue. So you can amortize it over time, but you collect it at the front end, which is really good, which is better than regular enterprise software sales. So I think that does matter. Monthly, the MRR number is important. I think margins matter as well. We've had to focus on margins really early on. A couple of our angel investors happen to be here. I haven't seen them in a few years. And I was telling them, I've been reading all of these S1s for all these ridiculous companies going public, and just the fundamentals of these businesses are very poor, whether there's hardware or, inventory involved or not. And, because I think it was hard for me early on to raise money for this company, we had to focus on some things that other companies that are awash in capital don't have to. And I feel very lucky for that now because we are going to be profitable later this year. The margins have always been really good. They're better than the average software company, if you can believe that. But it's because we focused on it early on. We had to. So I think those are the things that matter. And of course, our customers buying and using it, not just buying it and leaving it on a shelf.
And what does a team look like now? I think when we, had this conversation, or you did the presentation 4 years ago, there were 5 people, right, or 6 people, very early company. How many are you now? How is the team
we're
organized?
almost 60 people, I think, which is very lean given everything that we do. We have depending on how you count it, we have about 5 active, in market right now hardware products, about countless software products on top of it. So it's pretty lean. We've managed to do that because our product is pretty modular. So we have shared code base across as much as possible. And the other thing, honestly, is that the second that the enterprise business took off, we launched that last year. We just spend almost 100% of our resources on that. It's very hard to run 2 businesses, 2 very different markets successfully at the same time. So we kind of have consumer going on autopilot for the most part. It's a couple software and firmware releases a year, whereas we're really focused on enterprise. So yeah, so of the almost 60 people, half of them are engineering and half are everything else. Right now we need to staff up primarily, and this is really fun because I thought this was going to happen much earlier. We need to really staff up on the marketing and sales side.
And so you don't deal at all with like the consumer distribution, like retailers?
No, we still.
Oh, you mentioned REI.
Yeah, we were at one point when we only had the consumer product line. We were in about 15 brick and mortar retailers plus every e-commerce you can think of, and we've scaled it back to only, I believe, REI and Amazon. Amazon on its own is huge, and our own like direct to consumer e-com web shop, and that's it.
Okay. Any other lesson that comes to mind, whether that's supply chain or the type of employees you want to recruit or like any of those things?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, as a sort of a segue from the last talk I gave, we had just chosen our manufacturer in Mexico. And I just want to say again, just how glad I am that we've done that. We've now done 5 generations of hardware with our manufacturer in Chihuahua, and it's just been amazing. Even with all of what's been happening in the White House and the NAFTA that now has the unpronounceable name, it is still just one of the best decisions we've ever made. The ability to be there within 12 hours, being on the same time zone, we still can bring it over the border, with no tariffs for now. It's just the convenience is huge. And I was worried about scalability. I was worried that once our business hit a real peak, we would have to move somewhere like China. And it's just not true. And the labor costs are only about 15 to 20% more expensive, which is expensive, but not when you look at it, overall, especially given the fact that the labor practices are simply better and more humane in Mexico. You can go to sleep at night feeling, like children aren't making your things and they're not doing it and no one is working unsafely. So I would just like to, say that for anybody here who's considering, who's still thinking about where they're going to make, your product, Mexico is a really, really strong place.
Interesting. And maybe just to close for my part, because I want to leave some time for people to ask those questions. I guess that's the more, inspirational personal story part of the conversation. So you have like this super interesting background. You speak 4 languages. You grew up in Brazil, although I heard somewhere you started in South Dakota.
My parents are not American, but I was born in South Dakota because my father was transferred there for 8 months to run like a merger and acquisition in Sioux Falls. I've never been back. But I have an American passport, and that facilitated my ability to start a company here when I finished college, which I probably would not have been able to do if I was on a student or other kind of visa. Okay. So very lucky about that.
But the inspirational part, I think, is like, so you're running this thriving company. You raise money from some of the best VCs out there, doing something like really interesting. But your background before doing this was not like tech, sort of mechanical engineering. I think you had a journalistic background and then a little bit of tech.
Yeah, my first job out of school, I was a journalist at the LA Times. But I joined in 2007 after college when nobody knew how to do newspapers and online yet. So it was kind of a depressing time to join a very dying industry. And so I quit my job. I drove up the Pacific Coast Highway to San Francisco, and I got a job at a startup. And I've stayed in tech since. But yes, before I worked at a variety of startups in San Francisco and in New York before I started goTenna, but none of them were hardware related or connectivity related. And I think that there's real value to not being an expert. One, because you don't know how hard it's going to be, so you jump full into something that, it turns out takes 7 years to get to the place that we are now. Maybe it would have not taken as long if I was an expert, but I also don't think we would have come up with the idea that we did if I had been somebody who'd been in telecommunications or infrastructure for a really long time. I've said this story before, maybe here, but when we had the idea, we thought, wow, why don't phones communicate directly with one another? And that was the question that we started with. It was very basic. But when I went and I met with people at MIT and at AT&T Bell Labs, et cetera, we sketched out what we were thinking of doing. People, first I wanted to verify, can it be done technically? Yes. And then I also wanted to know, has anyone done this before? And the answer was no. And I thought, well, this is either a really stupid idea and there's a reason why no one's done it, or we're really, potentially we found something big that everyone else is missing. And I think that we saw something that people were missing because we asked, a quote unquote dumb question, like, what would it take for my phone to do this and why doesn't it do it? And it just led me down, a 7-year rabbit hole, basically.
There you go.
I think it's been valuable, and I also think in tech, quote unquote softer skills are pretty undervalued, and I think that's part of why I think our company has succeeded over the years, is that, it hasn't only been about the product. There's been a lot about mission and just like the humanity of the problems that we're solving. And I think that's kept us humble and focused and lean.
That's remarkable. And, we get the question so many times, like there's so many people that have, great ideas and want to start a business, but are looking for a tech co-founder and all the things. Like, how did that work initially? I think you had your brother that was
my brother and I started the company together. We are both technically non-technical co-founders, but very technical,
So who was the tech person you found? You just recruited a tech person?
I went to, when we had the idea and I had vetted it with, all these people at academic institutions, I joined.
By the way, just that. So you had this idea and you just called up people
and people love giving advice. They love explaining to you how things work. And so, people will take meetings even if they don't know you. And eventually once I confirmed that it could be done and confirmed that the high level way that we were thinking it could be built was possible, I joined a hardware hack space in Brooklyn called, what's it called?
Transistor.
Transistor. Resistor. Sorry, Resistor. New York City Resistor. I haven't been there in years. And I met Raf, who is our first employee, who's still with us. So he's been with us for almost 6.5 years. And he was the founder of this hack space. And the idea was, okay, I guess I'm just going to learn how to, how to program a Raspberry Pi and build something from scratch to start. And eventually he got just so into the project that he just built it for me, which was much better. And I probably met him in January 2013, and we had a working prototype by March. And so I think when I got back from the trip where we tested the first product, it was on a family vacation in the Dominican Republic, I think, I incorporated the company and hired him as our first employee. Yeah.
What an amazing journey. All right. Thank you for sharing all of this.
Thank you.
Questions? Oh. We hardware constrained?
Very, very hardware constrained at Hardwired. All right. Questions? Who's got the first question? Great.
Do you mean to say that your first prototype was on a Raspberry Pi?
Yes.
And what was the range of communication it could...
Well, the Raspberry Pi wasn't controlling any of the RF, but our first prototype ended up getting the same range that our first commercial product got, because it's just the laws of physics. It's the same output emitted power and the same spectrum that you're working on. But the very first range test that we did was about a mile, just over a mile. It didn't mesh. So it was just point to point, but that was the very first transmission ever. It was at the surf school on the beach. It was a little over a mile, and maybe it could have gone further, but the beach was only that wide.
Yeah, well, RF designing the right antenna in 2 months is a real achievement. Congratulations.
Yeah, no, looking back on it, it's incredible that we got it to work. So that first working prototype was March 2013, but we didn't have a product that we could really give to people in their hands until I believe it was July or August 2015. So we had a lot of learning and mistakes to do in the interim.
Have you encountered any issues or hardships as a female founder?
Yes, I've written about this. Yes, biases are very additive. So it's not just that there's a smaller universe of investors who want to invest in you if you do hardware. They're also don't understand government, businesses that sell to the government. So that's one other, knock on you. And then the third is that, you don't look like most founders that walk into the room, nor most investors. In fact, while I am very lucky to have some female investors, they're all early stage investors, and either because, we're in the deep tech space or just because, growth funds, there are frankly less women deploying capital, which is part of the problem. I met 0 female partners during my fundraising process for the last round, which is kind of depressing. That being said, I've actually crunched some data earlier this year. We pulled some data with the help of a reporter at Crunchbase, and we discovered that the exact numbers are on my website on this blog I have called Industrial Felt. So you can see them there, industrialfelt.com. But I think it's something like if you are in a non-female category, so let's say a business that doesn't sell primarily to women, you raise, up to 75% less than men, even, up to 75% less than men, which is insane and wrong, primarily, for a variety of reasons, all of which most of you probably agree with, so I don't need to preach to the choir. But yes, I would not say that I have, I obviously am a woman. I don't think that's my defining feature, but I think that when you're in a room full of men making decisions about whether or not they believe in what you're going to do, that starts to feel like a really big deal. But I think that now, that things are going so well for the business and we've worked so hard for it, I just think more women need to be more visible in doing things that are not just, say, fashion or beauty. Not that those aren't perfectly great, businesses. In fact, women should be running most of them. I think there are still a lot of men running businesses that primarily cater to women, and that's of course fine. The only place in VC where women are being invested in equitably compared to men are in female industries. And that I think is problematic because, if we want women to go into STEM, they need to be able to see that people can succeed in STEM as well.
Quick question for me. So on your blog, which I've read, and great Guerrilla post recently as well, you talk a lot about building the programmable mobile infrastructure. What do you see as the biggest inhibitor to the next step of growth for that? Is it something that is, a 1-year problem, 2-year problem, 3-year problem? And just would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we want to be that connective tissue that connects everything. We want to eliminate what is known as the last mile. We want connectivity to exist absolutely everywhere. We want to do it in a low cost, low power manner, and that's what we're doing already. But until we are integrated directly into, say, phones or whatever is the most personal device that everyone will have moving forward, but it'll probably be phones for a very long time. It'll be hard to get the kind of density that we need to be that connective tissue absolutely everywhere. We worked with Google actually 3 years ago. We built goTenna Mesh, our consumer product, into a prototype Android phone that they were developing. Unfortunately, they did not release it because it was around the same time that Google reorganized into Alphabet. And the entire team working on this R&D project, they were all from DARPA, were poached to Facebook, so the project died. But we know we can do it. And recently, I was on vacation in Uganda, and I heard that Apple was inspired by our product and decided to try to build it into a iPhone, but they couldn't get it to work. So if Apple wants to integrate actual goTenna into a phone, we'd love to do that.
Well, you answered my question. What is preventing them to do it?
Sorry?
What is preventing Apple or any one of those players to do it? I mean, how?
Well, it's really hard. It's really hard. We have also very deep IP in this space now. So the moat is deep in a few ways. There's the actual intellectual property, the technology that we have patented. There's also the network effects. So the fact that we already have hundreds of thousands of devices out there, why wouldn't you just want to build on top of it? And that's why we're trying to build a very developer-friendly, again, easy to integrate, low cost, way to get to integrate our technology into other things. My inspiration is ARM. ARM makes chips that are in some way, shape, or form are commoditized, but the thing that they do very well is that they are, again, low cost, low power, and very developer friendly. So when you have a choice between what chip to use, and you have many choices in the world in which ARM plays, you choose ARM. Sure. Because why wouldn't you just let them take care of the lowest part of the stack? And we want to be that for mobile mesh networking applications.
Clarification, you said point-to-point range is 69 miles?
That's our record range. Typically, it's more 4 miles point-to-point, wow. But then you can mesh on top of that.
I'm from Puerto Rico, and that would cover the whole island with two.
Yes, actually, Puerto Rico was about to buy, thousands of our professional units to cover the entire Commonwealth. However, as you know, your government all left, and so that contract is a bit stalled. But we expect to, re-sign a contract when the new head of public safety is appointed next quarter. And with relatively few units, and you can put one strategically on top of the mountains. It's already been tested. For relatively little money, about $2 million, you could cover the entirety of Puerto Rico with connectivity that's always available.
That's awesome. All right. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
This was wonderful. Congratulations on everything you've done.